Hello and welcome to Global Fact 7 online panel that we called quite dramatically fact-checking in the Balkans while the sky is falling. And soon you will hear why we chose that name. My name is Tijana Cvjetićanin. I come from two Bosnian fact-checking projects, one titled Istinomjer and another Raskrinkavanje. And today we'll be talking about what it was like to fact-check the infodemic that accompanied the pandemic of COVID-19 in Southeastern Europe or the Balkans. And we'll be joined by four fact-checkers from fact-checking organizations that are part of a local, regional network called CCheck, or Southeastern European Check. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules. Since the time is really limited, everyone has quite limited amount of time to speak, so we'll be free to interrupt anyone who steps over that. Okay, and now let me introduce our panelists. It is my really great pleasure to introduce my colleagues from the region. Brakus from Faktograf from Croatia. Hi, Anna. Then we have from Montenegro, from equally titled project Raskrinkavanje.me, Milica Kovačević. Hello, Milica. And then from Serbia, we have from Krik and their project of a similar name, Raskrinkavanje, Vesna Radojević. Hello, Vesna.
Hi.
And also from Serbia, from a project called Fake News Tragač, or something like the Fake News Seeker. We have Tijana Femić Bumbić from Novi Sad. Hello, Tijana.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, great. I hope everyone can see us and hear us well. So let's jump right in and ask first Anna, how would you describe the situation that was here when the pandemic and the infodemic hit? So what was the ground that it fell on in terms of how we handled this information and how we were informed in general as a region and as individual countries?
Well, thank you. First of all, a very special thank you to all of those that were dedicated enough to see this as a recording, and a thank you to those who are watching us live. Well, the situation, as the title of this panel suggests, wasn't really that great. We talked about before on CCheck events how dis and misinformation creators care about the borders between our countries only when they can be used to amplify the effects of mis and disinformation they've created. Otherwise, much like the virus, their agenda does not stop at the borders. In our experience, misinformation creators, many of whom, of course, rely on the creation and the spread of misinformation and disinformation for financial gain, feed off of the nationalistic myths and stereotypes that exist in the countries of the SEE region. They use each other as boogeymen. And the fact that our languages are so alike only helps the spread of misinformation. This is just one of a few reasons why all of us decided to create this CCheck network so we can share knowledge and our experiences. I would also like to point out that disinformation and misinformation and its negative effects, in my opinion, cannot be solved without taking into account the levels of mistrust in political institutions and low levels of media and civic literacy. It also can be solved without taking into account that misinformation and disinforming content is created in a way which is easily consumable, readily available, and very shareable. Factual, science-based information often is not. This is a problem that in Croatia, and I would say in all of our countries, is a very big problem. It's very hard for us to get information from our institutions that arrives in a timely fashion. It's sometimes very hard for us to even receive answers to our questions at all, especially when we consider that by research that was done by Eurobarometer, in Croatia we have huge numbers of people that say that they encounter fake news on a weekly basis. 76% of people say that they encounter what Eurobarometer called fake news once a week, which is a much higher level than the all of EU. Of course, we also have a problem with the fact that by research that was done by the digital news report by Reuters, 56% of people in Croatia actively avoid news. Some of these issues have, of course, been used in this situation in a way that I would say made it possible for disinformation and misinformation to spread more quickly in this region. It didn't matter where it was created, whether it was created in Serbia or Bosnia or North Macedonia. It fairly quickly arrived in all of our countries. Of course, one of the problems with mistrusting institutions is in situations of a pandemic and infodemic, it is really important that the people you're talking to actually believe that you are presenting them with facts. I think my colleagues from Serbia are going to be able to tell you something about their research that they've done recently, where they discovered that even the numbers of people that are COVID that have been infected is wrong. Just yesterday, we've actually witnessed how leading epidemiologists in this country are, in a sense, trying to redefine what close physical contact and brief encounter actually means, after we learned that the world-famous tennis player Novak Djokovic is positive. And that's because our Prime Minister briefly met with him. First, it was said that he didn't have any contact with him at all. And later on, we found out that there are photos and video of that encounter. That is really significant when we know that the photographer and the video maker has to go into self-isolation, and the Prime Minister does not. The question is, how do you actually get official data from institutions that people don't trust?
Thank you, Anna. And on that note of how do you trust institutions, and especially in this region where they have not really earned a broad trust of their citizens, I would like to turn to Tijana and ask about another dimension of this relationship between us as citizens and us as consumers of information and the institutions, but not just in the present time. There's a legacy of conspiracy theories being presented as not just acceptable, but almost an official worldview in some of our countries. And this is something that has also influenced how we dealt with this infodemic and why it got so bad as fast as it did. So could you walk us through that a little bit?
Yes, thank you, Tijana, and thank you, Anna, for this great introduction. Thank you for this very interesting, but certainly quite hard question, because it's hard to determine the precise root of the propensity for conspiracy theories here in the region. I'm sure, and as Anna already mentioned, the reasons are many, at least in Serbia, where people are more likely to believe in anything written in a sensationalistic way. One of the answers, of course, lies in a low level of a media literacy among citizens, And then the other, a bit more complex title is, I would say, lies in this public discourse which was surrounding us for the past 30 years since the war in Balkans. This is a huge topic, and it would need definitely like a separate session for itself. But we could just say that in a nutshell, war propaganda, which was led in media and in public, was always, as expected, pointing finger in the other bad guy. But there is one problem in Serbia, and it is that Serbia never really gets out of that problem. The war propaganda somehow, in a way, continues toward neighboring countries or other nationalities, even when the war was over. I was reading some interesting column a few days ago, written by a colleague of mine, Dinko, about a quote which was spreading widely among the Balkans during the war, which is saying, "Serbs are winners in war, but losers in peace." This quote led people toward hate and extreme nationalism, but also, in a way, it left us with that feeling that there is always somewhere enemy behind. Even if we don't see him, he must be somewhere there. And we shall not say in peace, but rather stay cautious all the time if we want to lose. This discourse, as I said, is still, in a way, spreading around. After that war in Balkans, at least here in Serbia, we had NATO bombing in 1999, then we had situation with Kosovo in 2008. And all these events were like very fruitful field for growth of conspiracy theories, for hate speech media, for fake news, misinformation, disinformation. And what is very interesting, that we did research 3 years ago in 2017 as a fake news tracer about media headlines announcing a war, when there was no war, not even in Serbia, but neither in Balkans. But there were 265 announcements of wars and conflict in a year. And as I said, it would take much more time, as we have a few minutes. I would just say that there is one thing that is for sure, that during this turbulent 30 years of media manipulation, people didn't get media literate. Even if there was some media literacy, somehow it got lost between these bombastic and sensationalistic media headlines. People forgot how to make difference between real information and personal opinion. And now this time, we were in war with COVID. So again, we had that, we were in war, we had that enemy, but it wasn't just a global enemy. Somehow there was a place for conspiracy theories towards other nationalities in our region. And whenever scientists didn't have exact answer at the exact second in time that we expected, it opened the door for the other conspiracy theories.
Tijana. Thank you, Tijana. And with that in mind, let's take a bit of a deeper dive into what it looked like, what the government response looked like to the pandemic in terms of what was the information that was put out there, what was the quality of their communication with the citizens. Vesna, I would like to start with you. Anna mentioned you in specific in her part for good reason, because Serbia was really an, let's say, interesting case of government response to the virus. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. So, yeah, first of all, I need to say that for those who don't know much about media landscape in Serbia, that we suffer from a lack of media freedoms and political freedoms, actually, in Serbia. Why? So the main sources of fake news in Serbia are actually the mainstream media. Almost every single one, daily newspaper and television station with national coverage. So we have really a few professional news organizations who do their job the best as they can and respect the code of ethics. So why those mainstream media are so fake? Because they are the part of propaganda network for a Serbian Progressive Party, ruling party in Serbia, and for President of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić. So information about COVID, as Ana and Tijana also mentioned earlier, was marked with several things. On one side, we have increase of fake news and false information manipulation, every type of media manipulation about COVID on social media, on tablets, shady websites, mainstream media, etc. But we also have increase of false news and media manipulation on Viber and other chat applications. So that was really difficult for us in the beginning, because we we couldn't never almost get to the source of that information, and government didn't help us at all in that field. And on the other side, we have mainstream media who only report about those things official says about COVID-19 and coronavirus, and hold that state of emergency situation in Serbia, and they really didn't report anything about problems for citizens caused by coronavirus. And we have, yes, really a lack of transparency from government and institutions in Serbia. In one moment, we actually have some really bad decision from our government. They tried to centralize whole information about COVID-19 to cabinet of prime minister. They actually forbidden to doctors and health workers and local officials to talk with journalists about COVID-19. Only after big pressure, I would say, from public and journalists and activists, they withdrawn those decisions from there. So in Serbia, actually, when journalists wrote about problems, about COVID, about health workers, about lack of the equipment in hospitals, etc., they immediately declared as enemies of the state. Officials and President Vučić and ministers of the Ana Brnabić cabinet says, okay, you wanna COVID win in this fight, in this whole situation with coronavirus. It was really insane. And also I would just wanted to say for the very end, the coronavirus crisis interrupt on some way election campaign in Serbia. So we just had an election day on Sunday. So we have a lot of fake news, a lot of false information, media manipulation on every side you can imagine, and we have a lot of propaganda from officials, because they really wanted to looking to get the best of the crisis for themselves.
Thank you, Vesna. I think there's a lot more that could be said, but unfortunately there's no time to go into that much detail. I would switch to Milica now and ask her for her perspective of what it was like, what was the communication and information flow from the officials to the people during the lockdown, mostly, because we all see it as a pandemic that it's over. It's really not, but the lockdown phase of it definitely is for now.
Unless we are back to the same lockdown situation.
Yeah.
So I was of course following Serbia, as Ana already said. We speak the same language, and we follow the news from the entire region. And I have to say that in Montenegro we witnessed completely different situation when it comes to the government strategy in communicating the crisis with the public. And I think that they brought actually some good decisions. And even the research and the polls are proving that. So unlike in Serbia, we didn't have this thing centralized in the hand of a one man or one office. Actually, our prime minister showed up, I think, 2 times in the times of the biggest crisis with some, I don't know, political message. Entire communication was actually given, even the line ministers weren't there as much. The entire communication was given to the medical team. They were holding press conferences. It wasn't one person, it was team of the doctors. They had good PR advisor. They were showing that it's not a couple of them, it's a team of good, well-prepared expert people who are caring about our health. They communicated well with media. We in Montenegro have a lot strong media that are critical towards government. I haven't heard criticism even from them when it comes to the transparency of that part of the communication. And as I mentioned, it was visible already after polls were done, and those showed like that most popular, most trusted people in the country are some of the lead doctors with some strong levels of support, like over 80 or even 90%. And that is really important because of the things that we already heard about this region with the lack of trust and everything. But on a negative side, and I have to mention that as well, government didn't have a plan and still doesn't have a plan on how to deal with disinformation about COVID, how to deal with infodemics. So what they did was they did only 2 things, and both were wrong. One was arresting people for sharing fake news or producing fake news. And it is a problem from a legal perspective, but the problem is that they were very selective in that. So they would arrest a person that shares fake news from the regional tabloid that our president is infected, but they wouldn't arrest some other people that shared some other even more dangerous, very, very dangerous fake news. The other thing they chose is labeling media as fake news producers. Our government started debunking. We were in shock. They did that obviously without any methodology, and again they did that selectively. So they wouldn't look to debunk the fake news that suits their goals. They would only pick those that harm the government image and the government policies. And also in one moment they started to use that as a part of the political communication and actually to declare statements of the opposition as a fake news. So I would say that part that was done by the medical team, by the experts, was really good, while the government kept their usual approach in failing and using restrictions instead of communication.
Yeah, we have seen similar attempts in Bosnia as well, where there were like special new rules put in place to kind of punish something that was called spread of disinformation and or panic in society, which was also abused to basically punish critics of government policies, governments, because we have several of those. So it would really be interesting also to compare like country by country what these things look like, but that would be again time consuming. So I would rather skip to something that we all had in common as fact checkers, which was this huge spike in page views, in number of followers on our social media platforms. In general, the audience attention has risen really fast and really intensively during this health crisis. On the other hand, while we had this visible show of rising support from this silent majority that was liking and sharing and reading and everything, there was also and still is a very vocal and much more aggressive, smaller number of people who wage these intense harassment campaigns online against each of our platforms, but especially against Faktograf. Sorry, for the reason that it's partnered with Facebook and that it has a much more visible and much more immediate impact when it fact checks things. So maybe somewhat counterintuitively, before going into the actual content of what it is that we were fact checking and that brought us both the attention both good and bad, I would like to ask you now what you learned from this shared experience and from maybe your specific experiences in the countries where you work. Starting with Anna, that I just mentioned again, what were your main lessons learned from these past few months?
Well, first of all, I think that a positive note from all of the problems that we've now acknowledged and said exist in our countries even before COVID came up is that we were, in a sense, I would say, more prepared to tackle disinformation in, let's call it, creative ways. Sometimes when I hear from fact checkers in some other countries, and when I learn how easily they receive official data from like Office of Statistics or something like that, it makes me kind of giggle a little bit, because I think living here and working here has taught us to be more creative, to find different ways to get factual and verified information. That for me was very, very useful. Also, what we learned and what was really important for us is disinformation creators, in a sense, work together. If not on creating misinformation, they use each other to amplify it. Sometimes they all want to make money from it. And what we learned here is cooperation between our organizations and between our media is something that is very useful, not only for us as journalists, but for our readers as well. It's very important for us and for them to be able to understand that it's really different when somebody because they hope something is right, shares something on Facebook. But it's completely different when somebody does that intentionally, and it can cause you great harm. So definitely what we learned is that cooperation is key. It's really, really important that we continue this work, not only in our region, but also globally.
Thank you, Anna. Vesna, same question for you.
Yeah, so just to clarify on the very beginning, so I'm coming from, I work for Crime and Corruption Reporting Network. So we do a lot of investigations on that field, on crime and of corruption and organized crime, etc. And I am the editor of our debunking site, Raskrinkavanje.rs. So we recognize as the whole organization, at the very beginning, that we need to put all our efforts of 8 journalists, but still, to this COVID situation. We actually delayed every big story of, I don't know, organized crime or corruption on site and rush into this. And that was really big issue, but a really big lesson we learned from the how we can manage to become organization who works daily on daily basis, because we are investigative journalists and we are not so fast as some colleagues from daily newspapers. So we put all our efforts and human resources exclusively to the COVID situation, and we of course benefit from that. So we reported a lot about situation in Serbia, about lack of capacity of institutions to deal with whole problems, etc., etc. And readers recognize that and consider us as a main source for the COVID situation in Serbia. So other than that, we did have and have a really great experience with tips from the public. We asked them at the very beginning to send us tips, articles for fact-checking, or other important information for investigations, but we weren't really ready for the storm. Our inboxes were pretty soon were full, and we have 2 websites and 7 different social media networks, channels, and just one person could handle all of that. So we needed to organize us properly in that way too. So those are technical and organizational issues, but those are actually important issues for small organizations, news organizations like Krik. And of course, we don't deal usually with health problems, and I suppose that that's the same situation for all fact-checking organizations on the world. We needed to learn fast to read a lot parallel with our daily work.
Yeah. We will definitely tap more into that, like what it was like to fact-check something that is so complex, like a health crisis. But I saw little smiles of recognition when you said we weren't expecting this flood of everything coming our way. So I think this was a problem that we all had, like how to adjust to this sudden rise in demands and requests, and coming from people who are obviously sometimes even panicked and frightened, and it was really a lot to handle. So Milica, what was your takeaway from, if there is one such thing from this whole experience?
I actually was smiling at Vesna's story, because we basically experienced the same. So Raskrinkavanje is a small fact-checking team, but there is a bigger NGO behind it that was dealing with many things. And I mean, this start of inflow of requests of citizens, of this wave of disinformation corresponded with the moment of a lockdown, which basically killed most of our other activities. We couldn't have any advocacy or communication or roundtables. So I think I was really proud that it took us like a week for entire team to switch to debunking. And even people that are not journalists, they were researching, or they were looking for photos or uploading on the website. And really this tested our capacities it tested our limits. And I'm proud that we get out of that without making a huge mistake, because as you mentioned, Tijana, some things are really difficult to check, and some opinions were changed, and some most relevant sources of information appeared not to be so credible in maintaining the same approach. My biggest lesson from this, and it was to my surprise, I actually learned that we have really bad situation with media, politicized, polarized media scene. Everyone backing some political elites, and I didn't have high hopes for them. But actually, the facts are showing that mainstream media in Montenegro played this really well. We analyzed like hundreds of articles with some kind of disinformation, and only maybe a dozen originated from the mainstream media in Montenegro. Because then I realized there are journalists, there are responsible people, that professions still exist. I was really proud. And then what also happened to us, we finally got to the mainstream media. Before this crisis, it was very rare that someone would take our story and republish that, because they knew that they might be analyzed tomorrow. And we knew that mainstream media are hesitant from giving us that credibility. But actually with the COVID, I think that they realized how important is what we are doing. They couldn't manage to do that themselves. And then we've been republished throughout the time by all mainstream media. And I think that that kind of cooperation, I now believe, is really necessary to reach out to wider audiences, because, yeah, we had a great increase on Facebook, on Twitter. We used Viber group. We opened many channels. We produced videos. But I think for our message to be heard, this support from the mainstream media was, at several situations, for very important disinformation, was really essential.
Thank you, Milica. And Tijana, what was your key lesson learned from the experience?
Well, as almost all of you said, this COVID period just helped us, and we learned how to organize in the time of crisis, because, as Vesna said, we had like a flood of disinformation. But there is one good thing that I'm very happy about, is that people, maybe for the first time in the past few years, were in real need for real information. So we get responses, and we were contacted by much wider population and our readers on Facebook and the website, contacting us, trying to find an answer of whether this article is real or not. We had that opportunity to answer to almost all of their requests, but we had to engage much more people. We had to engage other people from our organization, same situation as Vesna said, and Milica, but we learn how to deal with this new topic. And as I said, what I think that is very good, that also people learned and started to think about how and where they are about to seek for the real information. So not just the mainstream media, because we had a lot of fake news, we had a lot of false statements around, which were very obvious, so that turned people toward us.
Yeah. Just to add shortly, because it's something that Vesna inspired me to say, we actually learned that we need more time, and since that is impossible to get, we need more people in order to share the work better. We also realized that we need to speed up and move up our plans to create structural cooperation with experts, and in order to be able to contact them faster than ever before. And we've also decided to move up our plans to expand the outreach we have to the community of our supporters, even though it's sometimes hard to focus on the positives when the levels of threats and hatred is just so extreme as we've been seeing. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for letting me add.
Thank you. That was a very good point. And from all the head nodding, I can see that this is something that we kind of all arrived to, especially the part of how do you allocate your resources, because time is not, you cannot stretch it further than it is. So I think this is also a very common experience for all of us, especially intensified during the time of crisis. But now let's take a step back from what we learned to how we got to learn that, and what was it that was appearing in our disinformation space, what it was that we were fact-checking. I would introduce one very dominant topic, that was pseudoscience, and especially pseudo-medicine. This was the first, I think, thing that started popping up on all of our radars, that was like claims coming from utterly incompetent sources about how you can protect yourself, or how you can cure yourself, or what is and isn't the virus, etc. But there was one specific subgenre of this, and it's not so much in content but in the source of those claims. And the source that I'm talking about were actual MDs, people with medical degrees, who kind of went astray from the scientific consensus and from their own disciplines, and started flat out peddling disinformation of all sorts about this virus. Vesna, I would like to ask you, because Krik, your organization, has a podcast, and you discuss this specific topic at length, especially this position being put in this position to not be a person with a medical degree and to have to fact check someone who is and is saying things that are not accurate. Like, what was that? What was the content of the stuff that was coming out of those sources, and what was it like to fact check them?
Yeah, it's a really long story, but I would try to short it. So unfortunately, believe it or not, in Serbia we have such a situation that we have a lot of contradictory statements about coronavirus, about COVID, from health workers themselves. So at the very beginning and in the end of the February, I think, we have some press conference with high top officials and some doctors and some health workers about coronavirus. And on that specific conference, one of the most prominent doctors in Serbia said that the coronavirus is harmless. And that is, I need to read that a virus could do nothing to us because we have a good genes, Serbs. So it was really insane statement. And on that press conference, he said also that that we are free to go to shopping in Italy because virus is nothing than that regular virus and colds we faced every winter or during the year. So 2 weeks after that, and on that press conference, our president Aleksandar Vučić standing next to him and smiling on those statements. So just 2 weeks after that, the situation in Serbia regarding coronavirus was so bad that we needed to declare state of emergency. So you can imagine what was the reaction from the public and from the journalists. So it was really insane that we have such base statements from health workers and that we needed to fact check those statements. Of course, for that you need a lot of data, a lot of other experts, a lot of other doctors. So the more experts you have, better. But yeah, that was really insane situation.
Yeah, and it wasn't just in Serbia either. We had examples from Croatia, quite a lot of those. There are some very active anti-vaccine doctors in Croatia, so with high public profiles, who also stepped in to give their interpretation of this pandemic. And this was something that we had to fact check because it kind of spills over from one country to another, so it becomes like a regional issue, regardless of which country it comes from. Another dimension of this is pseudo-medicinal claims and statements and information that appeared was a lot of claims that had to do with prophylactics or cure or different types of medicine. Probably the most famous one globally is the claim that came from Donald Trump about the hydroxychloroquine that turned out not to be quite true. That has had interesting consequences in two of our countries. Tia and I would like to ask you about that, and not just about that, but generally what those claims were. What were like these homemade remedies and medicines and cures, etc., for the virus and the disease?
Well, like you said, this one about anti-malaria medicine, which would help in curing COVID, was a global thing. The same as ibuprofen was a topic at the one time, whether it is good to take it or not. And here we meet with, like you said, question about who's the source of this information, or whether this information came from the medicine or is it politician, or is it some public figure? We did some research in Serbia. We were looking at the media outlets in March and in April, and we got that we had 43 different topics which they were spreading fake news is about in more than 250 media outlets. More than half of them were about fake cures, fake advices for prevention, and so on. And as Vesna said, the other thing is that people didn't trust those announcements because we had some very famous, let's say, international level experts changing their minds almost daily, but changing their minds not based on any research, but based on the public opinions which were changing. They were sometimes like totally ridiculous, as Vesna mentioned, like they were talking about our genes being great, or like there is no coronavirus, etc., etc. So people started seeking for other alternatives. Of course, there is also that thing that when something comes from America or from World Health Organizations, it's not that patriotic to believe in it, so we should rather switch to claims of our doctors, which are not always informing us in a responsible way. There was the other thing that was very spreading largely in Serbia is also our statements from, for example, folk singers who were advising us to take Tyrol hot medicine together with rakia, which is like a grappa in Serbia, and garlic, etc., etc. But then there were claims about medicine named Arbidon, which exists in Russia, and it is very cheap, and it is selling with no recipe. So the people started asking questions: why can't we have that medicine? So this flood and this huge number of fake informations, which this time was more than ever before, were also spreading towards new channels such as Viber groups, WhatsApp groups, and we didn't have that before, at least in Serbia. We're leaving people confused, but one is for sure, that they were leaving us with no, I would say, no ways to look for, and like informations that were coming from the medical workers or from the scientists did just not have enough space in our media landscape, because we were flooded with this misinformation, which if you read them now, they're funny, but in the time when we were in a lockdown, people were very likely to believe and to spread it, especially over their Facebook or some other channels of communication.
Yes, and the nature of this information has also changed a little bit. So now it's not so much about the cure, it's actually about whether people believe that the virus is real or not, which is a whole story in itself, and we'll get to that. But before we do, I would like to ask Milica to let's switch gears and talk about a different aspect of the pandemic, which is a political one, or rather a geopolitical one. What was that aspect of the infodemic like, and what was it like to fact check it?
Just in case non-Balkan followers are listening to us today, so there is for years now obvious interest of Russia and China to influence the public opinion, and they are applying different tools of both soft and sharp power to get to there. And it was a matter of time, and when actually we noticed these narratives and these efforts also in the disinformation during the pandemic. So even within very first week, we could already see that the same actors and the same outlets and the same narratives are actually only adjusted to the new circumstances of the pandemic, but that very same messaging is finding its way to the readers. Who are the players? We have China. China had a really bad start. I mean, virus started there. And first news were really negative, and they were even discriminatory, racist pieces about China. But they started to handle their image abroad very quickly. And what we are seeing now already for months is are impressive news from China, how they handle pandemics well, how they provided assistance to all of the world, including gas. We were watching planes, fully equipped teams of doctors coming, telling us about their great methods and great medicine and so on and so on. And that peaked actually with a statement of Serbian President Vučić, who declared the end of the European solidarity and appealed to China, new brothers. And this is something that we will see the effects when the polls are done here. The other big player is Russia. They were luckier. They were hit later with the first wave of pandemics. So when the numbers in Europe were going crazy, especially in Italy and Spain, they had really low numbers, which was presented as Putin's success of his rule, of his strong hand. And there was underlying really dangerous narrative that democracies don't handle pandemic as well as autocratic regimes. And then coming to EU, to NATO, to the West, they were the target. They didn't start to fight this attack until very late. European Union was portrayed as disinterested, leaving entire Europe, leaving Italy, turning their backs to Balkans, forbidding medical equipment export, banning flights, humanitarian flights from Russia to Italy. Most of this was completely fake news, disinformation, but it stayed. And the actual support that this region got from the European Union was never as visible as the support that was coming from China and from Russia. And just to conclude, this is just coming through the already existing infrastructure. So media infrastructure of media outlets used for fake news and propaganda, especially of Kremlin, was just being used for that very same purposes during the time of the pandemics.
Yes, and when we are talking about what were the global trends and how the global angle of the infodemic look like, that is the underlying reason, I think, in some way why we call this period of April and May mayhem in a very similar roundtable that we had last month, when we all agreed that this time was complete hell when it came to fact checking. And Anna, I would ask you to talk more about that. So what were these mostly conspiracy theories that made the biggest mark on this time of the end of the lockdown, and what was it? What was this all about?
Well, to keep it short, I'll just pick out what was probably most interesting to me or to us at Faktograf. So after January and February and the first half of March, what we started to notice is something that we started calling super theories. So we basically were able to see real time how 5G, anti-vax theories, the origins of the virus, and everything basically came into this huge super theory that was now being shared and spread as it was like a global effort to delude us all, and the pandemic is actually fake because whatever. Also, what we started noticing in March and April was that people in this region were getting more scared, which means that they were more interested in finding answers to their questions. And I think one of the things that we need to ask ourselves, not only as fact checkers but as whole societies, is why is it so often that the first answer that pops up is the one that's fake? Of course, platforms did a lot of work around this for COVID specifically. So when you Google something, about COVID, Google lets you know this is some real information about it, and here's what you should read. but a lot of that is in English, and that's not good enough for a lot of people in this region and throughout the world, basically. When you take into account the levels of mistrust in institutions. So I would say that what we noticed in March and April, all of us, is a huge rise in readership and people trying to find out whether something is factual or not, and who and what to trust and what's actually going on around them. So in a sense, March and April was a big opportunity for us to do what we actually want to do, and that's publish stuff for the public and for public interest. Sadly, I think that in March, in April, in all of our countries, the governments and the official sources of information were not good enough. And just to kind of piggyback a little bit on your last question, those pseudo doctors or real doctors, they have a huge voice and they are being amplified constantly. And one of the reasons for that is that a whole bunch of other MDs in our country and in all of your countries actually don't speak up. You can only hear a couple of them. And that's when you call them up, by phone and try to get a quote from them. I think that there is a very grave need for, medical associations and other very, specific associations, for example, of physicists or others that can be connected to 5G, for example, to speak up. And I kind of feel that the responsibility for a well-informed society should be shared, and we should accept our responsibility. That includes, those doctors that are actually willing to share factual information. And in March and April, we didn't see that. We just didn't see that.
Thank you for that point. It's a really good one. We had a similar experience even before, like at normal times, where people, for example, when the topic of vaccines is a question, that people who are actual experts don't want to talk about that in public because they had experience before of being like treated with this false balance approach from the media. So you take a statement from someone who is an actual, epidemiologist, and then you put it on the same level as a statement from someone who's an entire quack doctor. So they have been burnt by that media approach. So that's, I think, a part of the reason why we don't have this quality information out there from quality sources, because they kind of pause, when it comes to public speaking. So I think we only have a few minutes left, and we have had some questions from the audience. And one I would direct to you, Vesna, was this pandemic something that pushed for more public demand for quality information from the government? Coming from Celine, this question.
Okay. So yes, news organizations like Krik have done a lot to uncover some unknown things about COVID and how institutions dealing with all the problems caused by coronavirus. But and we really noticing increased interest for I would say clear information from government. But I need to say that problems cannot be solved in some short period of time, because we have a big problem with the institutions that have been captured by ruling party for a certain amount of years now, and they're not be punished for hiding information, neither from prosecutors, neither from citizens on elections. So it was not difficult for them in that to behave in the same way in this situation, just to hide information.
Thank you. We're just getting another question from Flora, and she's asking, whether with increased demand for factual information, have we seen increased support for the organizations that we're in, either moral or financial? So maybe Anna, I would go to you for that.
Well, the moral part, sure. We've received a lot more questions from our readers to fact check specific statements or videos or photos that they care about, and in a sense that the gratitude we feel from coming from them after we do something that's important to them has been something that we are kind of very proud of to be in that sort of direct communication. Increased financial support, maybe just a little bit. Still, if you want to support good fact checking, please let us know. Like all of us, CCheck Network will be really grateful to you. But we will accept moral support as well. So I don't know. This is the best I can do without. Yeah, that's okay. It's a hard question. It's a hard question. I'm sorry.
And we had another one that I'm going to try to answer myself really fast. The question was about the sources, quality sources of information and relationship with of journalists and statistical agencies. And I want to take it because in Bosnia, that's a super complex question, because we have two entities, each with their own statistical agencies. So we don't even have one unified statistics for every statistical parameter at the state level. So as Anna said at the beginning, we especially here, and I'm sure it's not that much different for other countries either, need to get really creative and need to really kind of even be street smart sometimes about how we get statistical or any other information. It's not that it's not there. I know that there are countries with a much worse situations where you don't really even have the data, or you have it but it's entirely closed and you cannot reach it, etc. We grapple with things like, is everything machine readable, is everything comparable, etc., which makes things harder but not impossible. So that would be the answer to that question. And since we're over time, I'm sorry to have to wrap up this conversation. Thank you all. It's been a real pleasure. And if anyone is interested, we can also send a link to the roundtable where we went into more detail in terms of these trends of disinformation and what they were like, and discussed also how we tackle them in a much broader way. So thanks everyone who listened and watched, and do enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.